Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had a major impact on her life and work is Spiritual Guide, Medium, Midwife to the Afterlife, and Galactic Citizen, Hope Fitzgerald, who's the author of The Infinity Wave, Mastering the Art of Love, Compassion and Flow. Revealed to Hope in a series of visions, the Infinity Wave is a 10th dimensional energy tool whose purpose is to accelerate personal and global spiritual evolution and to increase joy and freedom even during these tumultuous times. We'll hear more about the Infinity Wave later in the show. For now, we're going to discover the 10 best spiritual books that helped Hope Fitzgerald carve out her life path. Hope Fitzgerald, welcome.
Thank you so much. And I love your premise. This is really fun.
Good. I'm glad about that. You've been an avid reader all your life, mostly non-fiction, it would seem. That's unusual for a child. Most children, they love all the fiction. Why were you drawn to non-fiction, do you think? And what kind of non-fiction?
Well, it's a good question. I did like fiction for sure, but I loved hearing about historical characters. When I was 10, I became completely obsessed with Queen Elizabeth I. And I read every book I could find on her. And as a 10-year-old, I would have to walk to the different libraries in my town. When I ran out of there weren't that many books on her for my age range. So I read, much more advanced books. So I think I got captivated by the idea of historical characters really being live human beings. Joan of Arc was another, Florence Nightingale was another. And so that's what just attracted me. I don't know why, but in a way, reading historical uh, uh, stories. I mean, they were put in a context where it felt like a story. Like I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't dry.
Yeah.
They weren't dry.
Yeah. You must have been reading the same books as me because I did the same thing. And, my teachers were always asking, why are you reading all these books about saints and kings and queens and, missionaries and people instead of the fiction? But no, I wanted the history.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. It's about people, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
real people. And there's nothing more fascinating than real people's lives. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing this particular show, is because we really get an insight into what shaped you. And,
For sure.
some of it is through the lens of the books that you've chosen. And there's also more to the story than that. But let's start with your first book. This is a book that comes up time and time again. It's Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and by Richard Bach, published in 1970. Everybody loves this book.
Well, it came out at a time when we didn't speak of such things. It wasn't safe to be talking about spirituality so much. But that book seemed to just resonate with so many people, even those who were, into a more narrow religious kind of mindset. It opened the heart, it opened the mind, and spoke of something ephemeral. And I think it was a safe way for us to connect on that level. So it was I was a teenager when that came out, and my mother read it. My mother's boyfriend read it. Like older people were reading it. Everybody was reading it. It was fantastic.
It's amazing. I mean, parables, are so important, and they slip beyond our, the judgment, the left brain, etc. And we put ourselves into that parable, and they seem to have a much more effect than just a straightforward piece of fiction.
It's interesting that you speak of the parable because I also set myself to reading the Bible, and I made it partway through the Old Testament, but then I went to the New Testament, and the parables were what really captivated me and got my mind, really, what does that really mean, and how does that apply in my life? And so you're right. At the same age, I was looking for the parables in the New Testament.
Yeah. Number 2 book is quite different, On Death and Dying, What the Dying Have to Teach Doctors, Nurses, Clergy and Their Own Family by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, published just a year before Richard Bach in 1969.
So my mother, God bless her, I chose well with her. Let's just put it that way, because she was extremely open-minded at a time when even more, it was more sort of sacrilegious to talk about the spirit and the paranormal. But she opened the door for me, and she had that book, along with Jonathan Livingston's Seagull and other books, on her shelf in our little library. And I had this kind of game I would play with myself as a teenager if all my homework was done and I was, twiddling my thumbs. I'd go in and just let my fingers go across the books and see where it landed and what I picked up. And that's how I found that book, On Death and Dying. And I sat down and I read it from cover to cover in one shot.
How old were you?
17. So this is, again, not something your average 17-year-old at that point, at least nobody I knew, was sitting and reading about that. But I was so moved by it. And I think the idea of the sacredness of dying and treating it as such instead of this scary thing was just opened my mind and opened my heart and laid the groundwork for so much of what happened in the rest of my life.
Also at 17, you read the 3rd book on your list, which is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, published in 1923. Again, just an extraordinary book for a 17-year-old to be reading.
I found the same way on my mother's bookshelf. I pulled out this little skinny book and like, Prophet, and again, now that I couldn't gobble in one go because that takes a lot of integration. And I can't say to this day that I mean, it's one of those books you can go back to over and over and over again and still glean more and receive more as we become more experienced in life and exposed to life's turns and twists and all of that. But I remember so clearly reading the one, I think it was on grief, and on this idea that the more that we grieve, the deeper our well is to contain joy. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was all that struck me. My parents were separating and divorcing, and there was a great deal of strife between them at this time. And so this sense that there could be a positive outcome from carving this well of grief was so uplifting at the time. It's never left me. Obviously, I'm still talking about it. So and other of those writings were pertinent, but I also had the sense that this book, I would learn more from it as I got older. And I did, and I have.
It's interesting because I recently tested this book with my own little, spiritual book club. And some found it really difficult. And they all seemed to resonate with 2 of the chapters, one on relationships and marriage and one on parenting, which I think are 2 standout, I mean, they've stayed with me. I have to confess, I don't remember reading the piece on death because what you said is so important. And it's quite an aha, really, for people to understand that, the deeper they grieve, the greater their capacity for joy. Yeah.
And it's so true, right? It's proved to be true in my life. And I think for really many of us. the one about marriage and partnership is also, as you say, so beautiful. That image of the two tree trunks, right? And then the branches interlocking. And I thought that also, I mean, I was still so young and I hadn't had a lot of boyfriends yet, but it set me up in a way to start to think about it that way. Because when you're very young, especially, we tend to be all about the branches that are crossing and twisting and twirling. We forget that we have these trunks and that there's this individuation. We get enmeshed very easily. So holding that image, that metaphor in my mind definitely affected me going forward.
Me too. So book number 4 isn't really book number 4. It's goodness knows how many books, because you said just many books by Ruth Montgomery.
Yeah.
In Search for the Truth, Strangers Among Us, A World Beyond, Threshold to Tomorrow, etc. Her first book was published in 1962 and her last book in 1999. So, we've got pretty much a 30-year period almost there. Did you discover these on your mother's shelves?
Don't recall, but I probably did. She had, so it's funny. The bookshelves that I described were for open viewing. Then she had a secret cache of books behind a curtain, and that's where all those kinds of books were. And I had the same game I played with myself: close my eyes, take a book. That it may have been there that I found the first one by Ruth Montgomery, and that just blew me away. This idea that a person who was a pretty hardened journalist, in the White House, you got to be tough to do that, right?
Yes.
Would turn into someone who was hearing Arthur come through her and write entire books. That whole idea was fresh to me and just intriguing as all get out. So I really I went from one to the other to read her books and understand. And over the years, of course, every time a new one came out, I gobbled it up. I remember at one point I was living in New York City. I had a job and I had an apartment and all those things. I was probably in my mid-20s, late 20s, and I was on a bus reading one of her books. And she talked about the flip that the world has done before and would likely be doing again. We've heard about this kind of rollover thing, and I remember just my heart stopping right there, and finally I realized I'd been carrying this sense of the other shoe falling for a long time. I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know what it was about. But when I read that, I went, oh, it could be that, but there is something that's going to be happening that is going to shift us into a new reality or a new way of being or a new landscape or whatever. I couldn't put my finger on it then either. But finally, I had this settling sense that I wasn't just making up this something's going to happen. I couldn't put my finger on it. So I learned a lot. Also, she talked about walk-ins, and later in my life, I had a walk-in experience. I had a context for it because of that book that I'd read decades before. And so, yeah, her books really laid the foundation for a lot of what ifs for me.
Yeah, I remember her book coming to me somewhere around about one of her books about walk-ins somewhere in the 70s, in the late 70s.
Yeah.
And I was, really into a lot of stuff, but I'd never come across her work before. And a boss of mine bought the book for me as a Christmas present, which was a strange thing because he was completely not interested in this stuff. And it really blew my mind. I'd never heard of walk-ins before then. But you said about your mother having this secret stash of books behind the veil. I love the idea that in order to go beyond the veil, you had to go beyond the veil.
Yes, exactly. It was setting me up so perfectly. Of course, I didn't know it at the time. And I guess I would think, oh, gee, wouldn't it be great to be able to communicate with, other beings and so on and so forth. But I never thought it would happen to me, you know, and so it was a complete shock when it did. Let's
Yes.
put it that way.
And we'll talk more about that and your walk-in experience after we've finished with your books. So number 5, I truly love this woman. I mean, she just broke the mold and put her career and her personal life on the line. Shirley MacLaine out on a limb. She must have woken up so many people with that book. And what a brave lady, to do that, especially with the fame that she had. She knew
Yeah.
she was going to be pilloried.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I couldn't.
1983,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
1983, that book was published, and the world wasn't really ready for it.
No, no, but she's never been shy, has she? And for her to spend the time, because she probably started writing it in, earlier, a couple years before that, to spend the time and her passion must have been so, so powerful. And her sense of responsibility to open us up, to awaken us to what's possible. I feel we all owe her a debt of gratitude for that.
Yeah, indeed we do. Indeed we do. Number 6, another one that appears over and over again in a great kind of primer, for newbies, The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, published in 1993. And that really did touch a nerve with people. Everyone was reading it.
Now, isn't it interesting that there's 10 years between those two books? In my mind, I think they're right on top of the other, but no. And that 10-year period, a lot happened. We had a lot more Wayne Dyer coming out, more obviously. Deepak was starting, I think.
Yep,
All
he
kind
was.
right. All
Yep,
kinds of teachers were coming to the fore, and all of a sudden, and I credit them. Look, you know, these forceful people who were sort of carving the way had to have a certain amount of ego to do that. You don't get somebody parting the seas who's kind of milk toast, right? It's not gonna work. And I just feel like we all stand on their shoulders for having that passion, that drive to awaken, awaken, awaken. And Shirley MacLaine is one of them. But that in that 10-year period, enough of that happened. So when the Celestine Prophecy came, there was fertilizer already out, and more people could grab it. And even if they just read it as a lark, which I'm sure at least half of the people who read it did, because it was a good romp, a good adventure. But it started the wheels turning, right?
yeah. We had the harmonic convergence
I was going to
course
say
in
it.
1997. And and I remember, big changes within me that started around that point in time. And you mentioned Deepak. I mean, about that time, I was working for a magazine, and I was told that there was this guy, this Indian doctor, who was visiting London, just had his first book published or something like that, and would I like to go and interview him? And I thought about it, and I went, "Yeah, don't think so." Little did I know. Yeah. So, book number 7, The Messengers by Julia Ingram and Gary Hardin, 1996.
Well, this is a book that very few people, I think, really know about, but it was amazing. It's about Gary as a businessman, really no spiritual inclinations whatsoever, but strange things start to happen to him. The alarm goes off at 4:44 in the morning. He constantly sees 4:44, and all kinds of anomalies start showing up. And at one point, he lives on a lake in Portland, Oregon, and he sees all these angelic forms coming towards him across the lake. It, you know, and the poor guy, I mean, I always feel kind of sorry for people who, don't have a background in this and all of a sudden they get a really big visitation, because it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. But so the first half of the book kind of leads you up to him begging for help. What the heck is going on? And he finds this hypnotist, Sandra, and they start to go in, just so he can understand what's happening. And lo and behold, he is taken back in time to being Saul, who we know as St. Paul. And it's one heck of a story. It's just remarkable. And it's told in a completely different voice than the first half of the book. Completely different. So I found the second half more compelling for me, but I highly recommend it because this is what can happen to any one of us, unexpectedly. And so I really loved it.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting book. Number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Many books by Lynn Andrews. Medicine Woman, Jaguar Woman, etc. The first one was published in 1980, and that was Medicine Woman. So you've gone through all of Lynn Andrews' books as well. What was it about Medicine Woman that really triggered something in you?
I came to those books through a very close friend who was fascinated with them, and her spiritual journey really turned as a result of those books into a more Native American venue. And I wasn't there at that time, but I was curious about what she was curious about, so I read the first book. I loved the other ways of seeing, other ways of hearing, other ways of perceiving the world with in terms of the natural world, what the natural world can say to us. I loved her teachers in the book. The teachers, these women who were just so solid in their knowing and understanding so far beyond 3D, and how rigorous they were in their teaching and their demands of her, and how she had to break down her conditioning. And that spoke to me. And I realized I need to break down my conditioning too. All of us do. This is one of the things that keeps us captured, in a framework. And so I did a vision quest with my friend. I didn't do the quest. I was a part of her vision quest. But I did other things. I did do a vision quest. What am I talking about? So I explored that world. What it ultimately did for me was to open my curiosity more deeply into shamanism, which I later explored and embraced.
Book number 9. 3 books. Conversations with God, 1, 2, and 3. Neil Donald Walsh, with the first one, An Uncommon Dialogue, published in 1995. Again, no-brainer. This one, all of his books, feature frequently on people's...
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure, because the idea that you could sit down and have a talk with God, was still pretty far out there. and have it feel so personal. What do I need to do to have a chat with God? That was kind of like my thought coming out of it. I just loved the perspective. And, years later, I did have several chats. So, but what Neil Donald Walsh and his experience opened for me was that it was possible. And it's not just possible for him or for me, it's possible for everyone. And boy, we've been misled in that way.
Book number 10, Many Lives, Many Masters, Brian Weiss. The true story of a prominent psychiatrist, his young patient, and the past life therapy that changed both their lives. Published in 1988. And again, one of our top 10.
I'm sure. Again, this kind of harkens back to the messengers in the church and to, I'm sorry, blanking. Anyway, any of these channeled books are, there's a similar theme, especially if there's a past life regression involved. This idea that we've lived before and that those lives are informing our current life. And more importantly, those lives informed why we chose to come again. What did we want to accomplish? What didn't get done last time that really wants to get done this time? That whole idea, I just found it fascinating. And also, and there have been many books since then, many books that I've read about near-death experiences and the lives between lives. And, anyway, I just loved all of that. And again, that factors into my current work so much. And also, having had my own past life regressions, understanding better what I'm doing here and all of that. So I just find these things fascinating.
Well, that's your 10, 20, 30 best list. Now, I have to give you the prize for, succeeding in sneaking in the most books anyone's ever sneaked in with all these, and the other ones. And I know you gave me 7 more as well. We won't talk about them, but we will mention one of them that you really wanted to add, and that was the Findhorn Garden.
Thank you very much, Sandie, for tolerating once I started, when you first said, oh, yeah, come up with 10 books, I'm like, God, can I even remember? Once I opened that hatch, they just came flying out. And the Findhorn Garden was another one behind my mother's veil, behind the curtain. I went in on a summer afternoon or summer morning. My mother was out. I did the thing. I pulled out this book, The Findhorn Garden. Now, the thing is, my mother was an avid gardener. She had beautiful gardens and loved flowers and all of that. So I thought it was a book about gardening. Well, it is, but it isn't, right? And I just, I might as well just read the first few pages. I didn't really want to read a book about gardening. At least I didn't think I did. But within the first few pages, I realized, oh, this isn't necessarily about that. And again, in one sitting, I read the whole thing. My mother came in, 4:30, 5 o'clock that day. I hadn't moved. And I'm sitting there with the book in my hand. And I said, I have to go here. I have to go here. She said, well, I'm going this summer. Do you want to go with me? I said, yes, I do. And that book, for people who have never read it, I highly recommend it because it is, it opens the mind to the aliveness, the consciousness of nature, of the natural world. It also opens the mind to what paying attention to guidance can look like. It opens the mind to how to manifest and how to trust in source 100%. The miracles that are described in the book, the plants that bloom and grow in completely impossible soil situations, tested, measured by the British Horticultural Society. And then the way that people come together as a result of these, of listening and paying attention to the guidance. People came together in such a spirit of love and community with the land, with the natural beings, that it was another world, really. And when I went there,
what year did you go there?
1976.
Oh, 76. Wow. So it was still fairly young.
It was flourishing. It had a second campus. There were hundreds of people visiting. There were hundreds of people who were living there. And Eileen and Peter were still there in full force. In fact, I was there the summer that their octagonal great hall was finished. I was in the team putting the stones on the top of the roof to hold the roof down. And that night, we gathered for the first time as a community in their hall, which was placed on top of a vortex. And a woman was there visiting who was an opera singer, and she sang Ave Maria a cappella in that great hall. And I'll never forget it. It was a christening of this incredible place. The love vibration in that, on that property with those people, I usually say it blew my cork out. And I went to a new level of being as a result of it. But the book itself carries that vibration, carries that energy, and just is a great primer for how we all can take up their practices and make them our own.
Yeah. I went there in the early 2000s. So it was, well bedded in at that point.
Yes.
And yes, it is a magical place in a magical location.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about you. At what point did all this reading, kind of tipped you into a career, earning your living, in the spiritual arena? How did that come about?
Well, I think many of us consider ourselves students of spirituality. Do we ever get to the end of it? Do we ever figure everything out? No, because we're always going to be students. So I was very comfortable in the student role, and I still am. And along the way, I learned a bunch of things. I went down many rabbit holes. I investigated different philosophies and religions, healing techniques, meditation styles, yoga, blah, blah, blah. Lots and lots of just exploring all over the place as a student. And I would have been very happy continuing in that role. I had my regular life over here. I had my spiritual life over here, and they were pretty much parallel tracks.
What were you studying?
What was I studying as?
Yeah.
I'm talking
as a student. You were a student.
Well, when I say I'm a student of spirituality, I'm talking ever since I was 17 and I learned TM and started all along, right? So then 15 years ago, and I had learned to work with sound bowls and sound healing and all that kind of stuff. These were just things I explored, but I didn't really do it as a career. I did it just because it was interesting. And I had circles in my home on a regular basis, and I offered ritual and ceremony, and I built a labyrinth. And, I just wanted to bring as many people into this and share the circle with me as a fellow student. That's possible. So then in 2010, I had a very tough year. And as a result of that, I was very depleted on all levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so I realized in order to not get sick, because that's what often happens when we get that depleted, I went to back-to-back sound healing retreats in Washington State in the U.S. with a beautiful man named Tom Kenyon. And
yes.
once I hooked in with Tom, I mean, looking back on it now, I realized I got into a shamanic like path with him. I would dream the thing he would do the next morning. There were so many link ups, and I realized we're in this together. He is my teacher. I am in it. I didn't have the words for it at that time. I was just in an altered state the entire time, just going for it. And my purpose for doing it was to clean out my inner bull. I just wanted all story to go away. I wanted to scrub myself clean of all the difficult challenges that had happened in that year and previously. So when I got to the very last practice, I had learned so much. I had scrubbed away so much with his incredible chanting and singing and sounding. And I thought, oh, good. I just have one last question. And so I asked the question in my mind's eye, just ask the question. If I could just get the answer to this, then I would feel complete. So we go into the practice and I'm doing my thing. And sure enough, the answer is revealed to me. I was so shocked by the reframe that it was and moved. I was grateful beyond words. And in my mind's eye, I went prostrate on the floor and out of me sprang the words, I am a willing vessel, do with me what you will. It's not something I went around saying every day. That just came out. Well, the practice ended and I was just tearful, just so grateful for the understanding that I'd received. I went home so empty, delightful, blissfully empty. And I'm walking across my living room. My dear friend was there, and I was starting to tell her about my time away. And this, to my utter amazement, in front of me was this giant wave, very, very high, turquoise, beautiful. And this giant wave was slowly moving towards me. And there was a kind of a byline at the bottom of it, kind of like you see on your television if you watch the news. And to paraphrase, it said, this wave represents a push of evolution that is coming to the planet. It's going to be moving around the planet next year and anchoring in at the end of the year. If you choose to resist this wave, things will not go as well for you as if you learn to surf it or swim with it. Then the wave turned on its side, became a letter C, big curling wave that you'd expect a surfer to come through. And in this one, the byline said, as the water moves away from the shore and deepens into the seabed to get its power, its energy to create that cresting water, so should you, meaning me, but ultimately everybody, leave your book learning, all those books that I had collected all those years, leave them on the shore and go to the earth and the wisdom keepers of the earth for your knowledge. Mix that with this incoming push, whatever it was. And then the water that was in that letter C curling, instead of just falling down into the ocean, it turned into this figure eight of the standing figure eight of water, flowing water. And that hung out in front of my face, about 18 inches high. And there was no byline. And I had to walk around with that for a few days before I sat down with my dowsing rods, having been a dowser by that point, maybe 18 years, and started to ask some questions about what it was. After several sessions, I came away with the fact that this is a symbol, a metaphor for a big energy, 10th dimensional love and compassion. That it is a gift from a loving universe to help us through the times that we're ahead, that we are in now. That it could be called a name, the infinity wave, and that I was supposed to teach the world about it. Well, I immediately said, okay to everything except the last bit. I do not want to teach anything in spirituality. And they basically said, well, you said you were a willing vessel, that we're, do with you what, that whole thing that I said. Dang it, I said that. So then I had to really think hard about it. And of course, ultimately you can't say no. But it was not my comfortable place. They had to put a foot in my back, and I didn't even know what I was teaching. I was being asked to walk blindly, and that's the important piece. When we're walking blindly, what can we rely on? Whatever is guiding us. And so you get real close and personal with that which is guiding. And then you realize you're working on this thing together. This is a co-creation. And that's how it started. And that's when my spiritual track began to move over to my regular life. And I would say it still took me about a year of giving monthly workshops to accept my role, accept that I wasn't completely crazy. When I saw people changing as had been promised, this was about spiritual evolution. This was about making a leap in people's spiritual evolution, not going the slow track, but going on the fast track, because that's what would be required going forward. And when I saw it happening over and over and over and over again with each ensuing workshop, I said, okay, I guess this is a real thing. And it was showing up in my life too in major ways. So that's how that happened. And let me just finish. I'm sorry. And in order to get the information to do it, I sat down with my dowsing rods, and that's when strange voices started coming out of my mouth. Slow, deep voices. And that's when the channeling started. And that has only grown immensely since then. But I didn't even trust channelers. So I had to eat a lot of humble pie with that. But so that's how I got the direction about how to proceed.
At what point did you have the walk-in experience?
The walk-in experience happened in 2013, not long after this. I was given a heads up that it might happen when I went to Peru with my husband. Guidance had told me to go to Peru, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to go to Peru, but they were insistent. And then a series of events happened which made it comfortable. Okay, I get it. I need to go, and I can plan all that stuff. It all kind of started to fall into place. And then just a day or two, excuse me, before we were leaving, I had a session with my mentor, and she woke me up to the fact that I would be given an opportunity to have a walk-in experience. Had I not had that, I don't know what would have occurred, but it just so happened. So my birthday is the spring equinox, and we were in Peru on their spring equinox. And it just so happened that we were in Lake Titicaca on the spring equinox. So Lake Titicaca, for those who don't know, is a very powerful place, much like our Mount Shasta. It's one of those places on the planet. And I didn't know ahead of time what would be happening, but I woke up with the firm conviction that it would be happening. I was speaking to my guides all along. They said that's when it would be happening. So I went and presented myself as the sun was coming up over the lake. And it was very interesting because I had told my husband about this just the day before, and so that was rather upsetting. But we had been counseled by my guides that night that an arrangement could be made so that it wasn't an all or nothing thing. And I came to find years later that there are all kinds of versions of walk-ins. And mine falls into one of the categories. I had no idea until really at least 10 years later. And so what happened was I presented myself, I went into meditation, and I elevated myself. But the strangest thing, I had a serpentine energy run straight up from the ground right in front of my nose like this. And it was so powerful. And I realized this is the life force. And this thing is relentless. I mean, it is unshakable. And so here I was behind it, elevating and trying to leave so whoever it was could come in. And I knew who it was, and I knew what they were here to do. Give me a little extra energy for the next chapter of bringing the wave to the world and all of that. And this is a being who had been really in the sidelines for a long time and just waiting for the right moment to, it's kind of give me a shot in the arm. Let's put it that way. And I realized that I didn't have the energy to get around this serpentine life force. So I just surrendered as best I could. And then I was pretty much a wet noodle for the rest of the day. I was not in my body. I could barely walk. There was a great rearrangement happening. I really didn't get fully rearranged for quite some time. It was a very interesting existence there for a while. And then what happened, and I know this might sound strange, but there's a kind of a revolving door between this other soul and me. And in fact, it's so merged now that you can hardly tell the difference. But she has given me what I needed, which was a little uplift, a little more energy, a little more focus. It's what helped me to finally be able to write my book. It's she's helped me immensely, but again, we're so merged that it's hard to differentiate at this point.
Did she have an identity?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's more because she came straight. I'm going to speak what I think is true. I could douse about it to see if it is true, but my sense of it is because she came straight from the other side and didn't have to go through all the permutations of growing up and all that stuff. She brought with her that heightened sense of in the world, but not of it, which is a place that I've been able to maintain for quite a while. And that has helped me immeasurably. Because before that, my whole life, and I was an actress for many years, I was very emotionally based, extremely compassionate, empathetic. That's who I have always been. I still have that, but I have it at a different octave. So I think it's partly because of her, you know, kind of lifted me into another realm. I don't know, but it could also be the infinity wave itself. I can't pin it down.
It's very interesting. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to talk about the groups that you lead. Are you taking people to Lake Titicaca?
I subsequently did bring groups to Peru and Lake Titicaca. I've taken people to Easter Island and all over the UK and Wales, Scotland, Ireland, southwestern France, South Africa, and the west of the US, and different places. I'm taking a group very soon to Sedona and Mount Shasta. And this time, these two groups are of a slightly different nature. In the past, I have gone to the antiquities, gone to the stone circles, the cairns, the places that have always been charged. And because when we go to these places, those of us who are seeking to make another evolutionary leap, we get the extra steam from those potent spots. And so I like to offer them as a trampoline for somebody. And it's so interesting because often we will traverse quite a bit of territory, and one person's going to get it here, another person's going to get it there, but it's wonderful to see people boom have a moment. So yeah, I've taken people a lot of places, and we work with the land, and we usually have some kind of offering that the land or the souls who are still sort of stuck in the land, maybe we need to help release them. This is where the death and dying work really comes in handy. So we show up to help in any way, but then we are gifted incredibly as well, and it's beautiful.
You have an event in Sedona, the end of April to the early days of May, and you're doing it with Alan Steinfeld, which tells me that there must be a galactic component to that one.
You are very right on the nose there, Sandie. Yes, this is a new experiment for me. I really feel that this changes that humanity is that we are perched upon, that we are really, it's imminent. That this upgrade, this growth, this evolutionary leap, very likely has something to do with our galactic family. That the more we can come together with them, they're going to be the ones ushering in this new age. I had always thought of them as, again, it's actually a third track. But now I'm realizing they need to merge with us, and we need to be the ones to wave to them and say, hey, we're good eggs. We want to work with you. We want to be taught. So that's what those two workshops are about.
And in Sedona, which is a very powerful place.
Exactly. Sedona and Shasta.
Very good. Did you ever imagine one day when you were peeking behind that veil, looking at the hidden books, that your life might take this direction?
Never. And I just want to lastly say, the reason I tell the story of how scary it was to assume the role of a leader in spirituality. I share that story because many of us are hesitant to do the same thing. We have old programming that we're going to be attacked in some way, or something's going to happen. But I encourage everybody to listen and take that leap if they're called to do it.
Yeah, and more people are.
Mm-hmm.
Hope Fitzgerald, I mean, this is why I love doing this show. I love hearing people's journeys. that we all have such a different path. We're all going to the same destination, but the paths, the intricacies, of the events that lead us into different directions is just, I'll never not be fascinated. So thank you for sharing your story and your 10 best books with us today.
Thank you, Sandie. It was really a pleasure talking with you.
Oh, you're so welcome. So if you want more information about the Infinity Wave and Hope Fitzgerald's coaching events, sessions, resources, and the Sedona event, visit her website at spreadinfinitehope.com. Spreadinfinitehope.com. Now, if you want to read what Hope has given us, I don't know what that noise was. If you want to read what Hope has given us for her 10 best list, because there's, descriptions of every single one, aside from the descriptions she's given today, go over to the website at nobsspiritualbookclub.com and you can find her dedicated page there, as well as many other No BS 10 best lists, probably about nigh on 300 of them. So you can dive around and see what people have read, what impacted them, and how that book might impact you. So this show is also available as a free downloadable podcast on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and all the other major podcast platforms. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another I'll get this right. Another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. I don't know why I gave it such a long name. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Hope Fitzgerald.